My name is Walter L. Smith II. I am organizing representative for Tampa Bay for the Beyond Coal campaign, Sierra Club.
Okay, so starting off with initial reaction to what's going on in Manatee County, what were your thoughts?
I was appalled. I was very frightened at first because I was like, wow, not knowing what this would mean entirely to the people who in the immediate area of the gypsum stack, that's a terrifying thought, right? Having worked on gypsum stacks before as an engineer, I know what they're like. I know how tall they are, how high they can be, and to hear the words fail, to hear collapse, to hear leakage and effluent coming from the bottom, that terrified me. That terrified me to know that that was the case. So, my immediate thought was to call some colleagues and to go down to see what the situation really was like down there in Palmetto, so that we could come back and report on it on my radio show on the Sunday Forum and on WMNF to actually give information to the people about what was actually happening. So we researched information regarding the history of this area in Piney Point, and we've been watching and monitoring the situation for at least 2 weeks, I think, since they were saying it's imminent that there was going to be an outfall into Tampa Bay, and that was very unsettling then. So now to see where we are right now, uh, and the reason why we are where we are right now is not only it's unsettling. It's very unsettling.
And I don't know, have you guys been able to kind of provide any kind of relief or anything to people living in that area? Have y'all tried to reach out to them, or is that not
We
you?
have no. We've tried through the Tampa Bay Disaster Resilience Initiative, which I and my dear friend Gonzalo Valdez and I created, uh, which is made up of frontline communities, NGOs and GOs, that's government organizations and non-government organizations. We were able to reach out to some people. Some people reached out to us to ask us what we need to do in order to help out, but we were not able. When we got there, the police or no other emergency people were able to tell us anything about where people had been evacuated to, because I think things happened so quickly in terms of the actual order to evacuate, that being able to say, well, everybody went to this location or this location. There was no one location. Everybody just kind of spread out into where they are. And keep in mind, Olivia, that what we have here is um, an area that is not densely populated in the immediate area, but you do have businesses and you do have some people who do live there, right? So when we got there, there were people who were doing business as usual across the street in the port, and they were getting ready to go home and so forth. But you also did have emergency agencies and emergency uh, professionals there in order to help out with the situation at Piney Point. But to find the people, to find where people had evacuated to is very difficult, because they just kind of left at the last minute, and there was no one shelter or anything like that that anybody was able to identify.
Gotcha. And sorry, kind of segueing. So this is obviously not the only gypsum stack on the Tampa Bay. There's others. Is there any concerns now with those? Or is this something that could possibly happen at any gypsum stack?
Right, right. There are some concerns. I've spoken to some people who I am in contact with all the time, who live in close proximity to gypsum stacks as far out as Bartow, right? As far as Bartow. Now, when you come in, you have South County, near Progress, in Progress Village area. Progress Village is a 61-year-old community, one of the oldest Black communities in Hillsborough County. And during its time when it was initially placed, and this is their short history, they were redlined. Their placement was based off of a redlining period, right? Which as we know, is illegal now, but was practiced then, 61 years ago. And they ultimately, there was an agency, a company that actually placed a gypsum stack or gypsum stacks near the area where Progress Village is. So much so that the dust from the gypsum stacks actually reaches their community, gets on their furniture, their lawn furniture, their cars, and things like that, and they inhale this. They inhale these particulates. So there have been some instances of health issues that have been reported. I guess the issue is that there has not been enough of an outcry or enough of a care, I would say, you know, in order for people to do, in order for our agencies, our government agencies to say, hey, let's go out and do a public health duty here. Let's go out and check and see what the public health status is of the people who are near these gypsum stacks. That's a very, very serious issue when you look at environmental impacts in frontline communities. And that's what these communities are that are near these mining areas. These are frontline communities. They're poor communities. And these people are the most impacted by these gypsum stacks, by these operations that take place. These are poor people. And of those poor people, it just happens to be that the majority of the ones that are impacted health-wise are Black people. Now, these are many of the people that we have. You take Progress Village, for instance, right? Predominantly Black community. You go out to Bartow, most of the people that I've spoken to, poor, Black. These are the people that we're talking about. And they have worked in these mining areas. They live near these mining areas. And when you hear just poor people in general talk about it, it is disturbing. It's very disturbing that no one thought enough to actually do the service of doing a public health check with these people to see if whether it was taking of blood, whether it was anything, to make certain that there was no connection with their illness and the operation that's nearby. That is, you know, that's something that could have been done. That's something that probably should have been done in order to make certain of to have a definite and more accurate assessment of the effects of the impacts on people.
So are any of those people in Progress Village reaching out to you and saying, hey, you see what's going on in Manatee, could that possibly happen here, or we're scared? Is that kind of the conversation?
I've had some people say that to me, yes. And with them saying that to me, you know, we've already done the studies. We've already checked these things out. We know what to expect in terms of what we're seeing now down in Piney Point, right? That's Piney Point. Where it is geographically is one thing. Where we are in Progress Village or in Bartow or anywhere else where these operations are taking place, you know, I think one of the biggest things that they're concerned about now is the fact that now that there is information that has confirmed that there have been inspections of these gypsum stacks, and that we now know that there was a failure in the lining of the gypsum stacks, and to know that there was deterioration and that this was not reported to the public is what bothers them even more. And because look at where we are now, right? We're in a situation now that you know, we're scrambling to try to resolve, and this could have been resolved before. Now their fear is, well, what's going to happen if something like that happens over here near us? Well, it's going to be a bit different, I'm sure, because of the geography. But at the same time, the impacts. To say, I was reading one of the statements that was made by a DEP official that said that that there is no radioactive material that has been released, right? Or better yet, they said that the material there is none of the material that's been released is radioactive. I think that that is a um that is not an accurate statement, or better yet, that's a not an inaccurate statement, because what they've tested so far probably has not been radioactive. But what we know for certain is that that stack it has radioactive material there, and there is a possibility that can be released. Now, if that's the case, that the statement should have been very different, so there's full transparency about what the situation actually is. And so I think that transparency is very critical here. I think that we need to be very, very careful about the language that's being used when talking about these types of things, because people are afraid. We don't know what this is going to do now. We know that our estuaries are probably going to be, or not probably, but they're going to be damaged. We know that we're going to face, we're predicting that there will be algae blooms again of large proportions, that will affect our shores again. People are predicting red tide issues, all types of issues with respect to the loss of oxygen in our water, uh, which affects marine life. These things happen as a result of these types of releases, where you have a large amount of nitrogen that has been let out into the water, and that combination of nitrogen and heat does cause these things to happen. So we have to be very, very careful about the language that we use, and because the people are concerned. They are very, very concerned. Now, they may not understand the science. Some of them may, but what needs to happen is the language needs to be needs to be needs to be processed, or communicated in some way, so it is processed by the people and they understand exactly what the status is step by step. I think that they're doing a decent job right now, since things have been coming out. But I just really, people are really appalled at what happened with this gypsum stack, and now they know the history of it, they're even more appalled.
So what do you think needs to be done so that this doesn't happen again at any other gypsum stack? What do you think needs to be done?
Well, first of all, I don't know what other operations do necessarily, right? Every operation is different. There are similarities, and I think, and I know for certain that the operations are different, primarily because of geography, primarily, and also because of the processes that are used. Even though the processes are similar, the disposal process of the material that's used, which is what these gypsum stacks are, is the waste material from processing of phosphate material. Um, People need to understand, first of all, how this works, right? We need to understand how this works. We ought not to have people thinking, well, we just have a stack, this large mound of whatever of material that's here, that we don't understand what that is. There are a lot of people that say that. We don't know what it is. It just, it's a gypsum stack or a gyp stack. That's what they know, right? But what's important is, number one, transparency. That is the number one thing right there, is transparency. If there is no transparency regarding these issues, then you are now putting people at risk. You are now putting people at risk. So transparency is number one.
So
Number
when
two,
you say transparency, people need to know if a gypsum stack near them is compromised. Is that what you're saying when you say transparency? Like, they need to know the status of that gypsum stack at all time?
absolutely, absolutely, absolutely. Listen, especially now, since this has happened, that took this for us to now have to reevaluate how these things happen. And I hope that that's what they're doing, that what they're going to do after this is done. or that somebody is working on that process now, since that's an engineering control. That's a failure of an engineering control that now has caused us a real problem. Now, that failure of that engineering control should have been reported early on. It was failing, and they knew that it was failing. When people are unaware of the hazards that they're going to be exposed to, that is a serious problem and a serious breach of trust between the people and the companies or organizations that are there in these areas. Many of those people work for those companies. They work for those companies. And so they trust those companies with their lives, literally with their lives. The safety measures that they go through, the training they go through in order to be able to work there is extensive. Not expensive, but extensive. And for this to happen now, and for there not to be transparency with people from industry to the public, that's a problem, because we've got to make certain that people understand the hazards that they could be, and they will likely be exposed to in situations like this, right?
So the people that you spoke to at what's the village called? Sorry, what is Progress Village?
Progress Village.
So y'all have already discussed with them the impacts of these gypsum stacks before this has even happened?
We had some discussion because of the history of the gypsum stacks that are nearby. Not about necessarily this gypsum stack. I've had this conversation with one or two people from the community since this has happened, but we've not had our typical meeting that we have with the coalition, and that's coming up this Tuesday evening. And the community meeting, which I'm not sure exactly when that particular meeting is going to be held, but it will be held soon, especially considering what's happening now, because people are now are really concerned about this operation that's near them. What's going to happen there? What happens when that fails? Or any operation for that matter that is industrial in nature that's near them, because they're surrounded by industrial situations. They have a coal ash pond nearby that is not lined. And if there's a flood from hurricane or anything else, then they'll be walking through a toxic sludge. This is not, again, the same thing can happen with a gypsum stack. With a gypsum stack, the same type of thing can be. As a matter of fact, if you read the daily news, you'll find that was a headline. That was a headline. And so this is not, what I'm saying is not something that I've made up. This literally, to get people all riled up. This is literally what is happening, So people are concerned. They're very concerned. And I have had the conversation with one or two people in the community, but we've not had our typical meeting to actually go in depth with the discussion.
So what is the mindset that people should be having right now if they live near a gypsum stack or something of that nature? What should they be thinking right now? What preparation should they be making? As someone who heads up this initiative, what would you tell them? What kind of advice would you give?
I would say that as communities, they need to organize. They need to engage the corporations that are nearby, and not and demand. Start out with a request, and then if that doesn't work, then make a demand that they are very transparent with their policies, with their procedures, with the hazards, with sharing the dangers. I mean, the very real dangers of those hazards to the people of the neighboring communities. And that is something that can happen. It's not something that can happen. It's something that must happen, actually. Usually when you have these not usually, you must. These organizations have safety data sheets. They have information about what they are working with. They must have those online in order for people to understand, in order for the fire agencies to come by and resolve any fires, industrial fires that might happen. They have information about what makes these these chemicals inert, right? In order for people to be able to control these things. There are, there are engineering controls that are put in place in order to protect not only the people who work there on site, but people who live around the areas. So the people deserve to know these things. This is real transparency. Uh, and without that type of transparency, you are not you're doing the people a very, very big disservice by not having that type of discussion with them. Um, and that to me is the most critical thing when you're talking about relationships between the big corporations or corporations that are doing business and the people who live near those corporations and that can be affected or that are impacted the most by their activities that they actually that are taking place there around them.
And kind of going back, this is my last question because I think you've pretty much hit on everything. But just going back, when you say that there needs to be a review of the engineering at other stacks like the one at Piney Point, who needs to do that? Is that should state leaders be doing that? Should that be a federal thing? Who should be the one reviewing these structures?
At every level, at the state, federal, and local levels, at every level, there needs to be a record of the conditions that these operations are in. There must be the checks and balances. Otherwise, there's a possibility for, we like to believe that people are acting and doing best practices. We like to believe that, right? But we cannot operate that way. We cannot operate that way because if something happens, like we've just seen just now, this is what happens. This is what happens, right? So think of an active situation. That's not even active. Think about an active situation that gets out of control. If the state, the federal, if there's no federal oversight because the state's resources are tapped, what happens then? You have to go federal. What if the local resources are tapped out because the local resources are minimized in some way or they don't have it? What happens? The state has to step in. So at every level, we must have checks and balances. We must make sure that the resources are there. But when it comes down to the communities must organize and understand the policies, number one. They must also understand the operation, number two. And number three, they must understand the hazard, which is probably most important. They must understand the hazard and what they need to do themselves as an organized group, as an organized neighborhood or community to be able to protect themselves from the situations that they're in. This is a situation that if you have to evacuate, and again, here are resources at every level, at the local level, if those resources are spread thinly and you have to evacuate in a disaster situation, what happens? Does everybody in your community know exactly what to do? Can they get out? Are you boarding up? Your windows? Or what are you doing? What happens? Right? How do you get out? What is that pathway for evacuation? What happens? Right? There are a lot of different things that communities can do to help themselves in preparation, but it is necessary that at every level, from local level to the federal, that every level is involved in the review and processing of everything that's going on here.
How do we get that education out to people? Is that something that you all as a group are trying to target communities? Is that what y'all are trying to do through that initiative, to just provide the education?
Right, that's exactly right. That's exactly right. We're reaching out to different communities. We start out small, right? Progress Village, Sulphur Springs, Town and Country, East Tampa, East Ybor, places like that. So we start out small with those 4 or 5 communities. But now we have to consider not just consider, but how we can move down south, because the goal was and still is to move into Manatee County, in the South County into Manatee County. We're already in South County because we're in Progress Village, but now we have to move further south and work there. There's a lot to be done, but I think that the groups that we do have done a tremendous job with what they're doing for themselves, and I'm very proud of those groups and what we've done as an organization. Even my concern is, and it continues to be, um, how quickly we can get out. We're trying to get out as quickly as we can to the other, the other communities. But it does take time. It takes a lot of time. But we're trying to get our message out to people to let them know before we even get there. Hey, listen, organize, discuss these things now. And we do have some people from other communities that come into our meetings and ask questions. I get phone calls all the time. How do we organize for this type of thing, for disasters or imminent environmental threats that are out there? How do we prepare for that? You know, for for your purposes, right? People make the mistake of thinking that this is a gypsum stack. We've lived around this all the time. We used to play around gypsum. Well, play around gypsum. You talking about drywall? That's not radioactive. It's not. You know what I mean? That's not what this is. This is phosphate. This is radioactive material, and people need to understand that. To say that it is not true. That is not true. There's no amount of literature that says anything different. No literature that says anything different. Now, the possibility that radioactive waste um, is not being released, hey, that is great. That is wonderful. But there's a bigger possibility that it will be. We must prepare ourselves appropriately. We've got to make sure, and I'll leave with this point, we've got to make certain that the people are aware of the hazards that they will be exposed to, whether you work there or whether you live nearby. You must know how to prepare yourselves. You must know how to act and react. You must learn what the safety controls are if you work there, and you must know when something is failing if you work on these sites. And I cannot stress enough the fact that government agencies at every level should have been involved and should be involved at every level. If they are not involved in that particular investigation or inspection, from the EPA to DEP to EPC in terms of the county and city, listen, then there is a serious problem. There's a serious problem, and it needs to be rectified. We must make certain that we are transparent, that they are transparent with us, and we must ask the questions that are necessary for us to educate ourselves and be safe as all these things are happening. So, I cannot tell you enough about how important environmental health and safety is, and those people who ignore it, shame on them. Shame on them. For those people who are paying attention to it, kudos to you. They need to continue to do it. I cannot stress enough the fact also that public health checks are very important when it comes to these types of things. Those communities that are nearby need to be checked for illnesses that could be associated with these types of operations, so we'll know how to proceed from there. Because otherwise, what are we doing? What are we doing? We're in the dark. The people are in the dark about their health, their true health. People don't just get cancer from smoking cigarettes or eating bad food. Sometimes it's the environment that they're in.